I was always a precocious child growing up.
Yeah.
And no matter what I was learning, I would always raise my hand and ask that dreaded question: why? Why are we learning this? I guess you could say teachers got revenge in graduate school when they would say, in this paper, you do not tell me why. And I'm like, oh, and I know how they felt. At the beginning of my class, I need to let students know why what they are learning is important and how they're going to use it. The story I tell is that I once met a person at a
Mm.
party and I walked up to them and I said, "Hello, I'm Shelton." And their response was, "Hello." And they didn't say anything else. And I held out my hand, and as I shook their hand was kind of, the limp fish, and it was kind of didn't move. Their palms were sweaty.
Oh.
And I kept trying to engage this person in conversation, and all they could say was, mm-hmm, okay. And even when they would talk about things that were exciting to them, like let's say computers or travel, they would say, I had a really great time. And based on that experience, what I tell my students the first day is whenever you meet someone for the first time, they will rarely remember what you say. Even
Yeah.
as a professor, I'm talking to you the first day of class, you will rarely remember what I say, but you will always remember how I made you feel.
Mm.
People encounter you again, their subconscious mind remembers how they felt talking to you. And this is the magic of INTERP classes. INTERP classes make you aware of your nonverbal. And by making you aware of your nonverbal, you can tweak it, you can polish it, and you can always make sure that whenever you meet someone or you're talking to someone, they walk away feeling good. So the next time
Mm.
they see you, they're not thinking, oh, what did this person say? They're saying, hey, there goes Shelton. When I talk to that guy, he makes me feel good. So I need to talk to him some more. So
Yeah.
that to me is one of the critical aspects of interpretive classes that goes unnoticed by a lot of students and a lot of parents and even some teachers. So, number one reason is you got to learn how to make people feel your message, not just hear your message.
Mm.
So, have you got any tips that you would tell a student who's in an interp class or who might be considering taking one?
I think it's really interesting what you said earlier. There's two parts that stood out to me. So the very first one is I told a story. In Interp, even though we start out with other people's stories, at the very end of it, the principle of telling our own story through other people's stories is a huge facet, a huge part of being an intern. Even though it's, we're just practicing, we get to understand the characters' motivations and understanding the story and the world that we choose to practice in, whether for our showcase at the end of the semester or at the um for our competitive speeches in the season. We get to choose which story best reflects the path that we want to take in life. We get to choose in Interp, we get to choose our own stories. And in Interp, by choosing our own stories, we get to go out of our shell bit by bit. Because by practicing our own stories every single day, we get to choose how other people perceive our stories. And then the second thing that stood out to me, and by choosing to be in inter classes, you get to choose how fast, how slow you want to understand yourself. That's really the basis of inter.
Well, I love storytelling because it allows you to share your reality with someone else. And looking
Yeah.
at it from a scientific point of view, there's a guy by the name of Walt Fisher who was a big wig in communication at UCLA. And Walt Fisher is known for what he calls the Fisher paradigm. And the
Whoa.
Fisher paradigm basically states that all the world is a stage. Human beings communicate best through stories.
Mm.
Human beings learn best through story. Therefore, if we can make great storytellers, by default, we make great communicators and great leaders. And I think that we forget about the emotional aspect of that. And that is what Interp brings in. So let's
Mm,
talk about storytelling for a moment. Give
yeah.
me, give me Januel's top 5 tips for storytelling for new storytellers.
Tip number one, understand your audience. So in Interp, we have to present the same story depending on the event, right? So it'll be we're not in an impromptu class where we have to present different ideas and the different stories every single time. But as we come to understand our stories and our pieces, the more you realize, well, if we had to perform it in front of a group of like younger kids, would they like a very serious rendition of your performance? Probably not. But if we want to perform in front of our friends, do they are they going to respond a certain way, right? So the more that we practice our pieces, the more that we practice our stories, the more we realize, huh, like I realized that this person over there like responded when I said this scene, when I performed this scene a particular way. And other people responded a certain way that I really like that stood out to me when I performed this particular scene a certain way. But that comes with a ton of practice. You're not going to be able to tell apart the different nuances of how you want to perform things unless you do it over and over. That's step
Repetition
number
is
one. Yeah,
why
repetition
it's
is key.
it's funny you mention audiences because I think that's the number one thing that we forget in all of our events that we need to remember.
Yes.
It's not about you, it's about the audience. So it might be your story, but the story shouldn't be me, 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 me. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do
Yeah.
you think of me? You know, we need to reflect that the whole purpose of a story is to share
Yeah.
our reality with others, but we have to invite others in. So it's not just about coming up with a story, it's about making that story generic but specific enough so that you can
Yeah.
invite others in. They can see themselves in your life.
Yes, that's a huge part of step number two, my second tip to be awesome at interp. You gotta include people. Will you include people if your eyes are closed? Like, or like if your body is like really small and scrunched up on itself, like, hi, I'm Coach Daniel and I'm gonna perform versus hi, I'm Coach Daniel and this is QD learning. Completely different vibes, right? Completely different atmosphere. By taking our time to get gestures that include people in, and like we realize or we show people the importance of community, because at the end of the day stories are built together by communities. By
Yes.
getting together and sharing our stories, we learn more about each other and we learn more about the way we want to progress, not just as a society but as people ourselves.
I know I this might be considered mean, but what I will do with my students is I will get them
Mm,
together individually if it's live or even just in the Zoom room if it's just them and I make sure
yeah.
no one else is around and then I tell them what you've been doing is 0. I want you to take it all the way to a 10. Think of a John Travolta or think of a Nicolas Cage, how they're just kind of out of control. I want them to deliver that story, at least the first part, at a
Yeah.
full 10, 15, 20. And the
Yeah.
reason being is I found it easier to get students to back down on the emotion than it is to get them to ramp up. And by going all the way out at a 10 or 15, they know where their limit is. So they don't have to worry about, am I overdoing it? They know what overdoing looks like. It's much
Mm.
easier to throttle it back than to push it in. So that's one of the techniques I use.